As we get closer to a new year, what are the trends that job seekers should be aware of in 2017, and what areas do we expect to see some job growth in? CTV News chief financial commentator Patty Levitt-Reid spoke with Tracy Wilen. She's the author of Employed for Life, 21st Century Career. They talked about the areas with the biggest potential for job growth.
Well, I think the biggest potential is healthcare. You know, we have become geezer economies, both in Canada and in the United States. In Canada specifically, there are more people over the age of 65 than under 14. Now, this is a market segment, right? We have different needs as we age, whether it's going to the doctor more, needing more nurses, needing more occupational therapists or physical therapists or pharmacists. But we also have a lot of different time on our hands. So we might be spending our dollars on travel or getting a pet, or we might be also needing places to live. Are we going to explore a retirement community, or are we going to have in-home health aides and services? All of this creates jobs in various horizontal platform areas. So if I were looking for a job for the future, I would track with healthcare and figure out what can I get there.
That's right. It makes a lot of sense what you say. Of course, our longevity is just so much greater than it was even a decade ago. Tracy, we also hear a lot about forget about the university, go and get a trade. That's what's really going to count.
Well, it's interesting that you brought that up because trade jobs are on the rise potentially in Canada because of the new pipeline projects announced in November. And the projection is there could be at least 23,000 trade jobs developed because of that. But you have to remember that a lot of us went to school. We were told to get the university degree so that we weren't in the trades. We weren't in blue collar. And now we have people retiring. So we need to replenish that pipeline. So I view it as an opportunity. But I also think people need to be aware that it's not really blue collar anymore. It's gray collar. It's really, we have to be much more skilled. We need to have much more technology knowledge as we enter the trades. And I think this can be an excellent path for people who like to work with their hands and want to do something other than an office job.
And Tracy, it is a really well-paying particular area, is it not? When you think about it, compared to other positions where people are moving into entry level, like think about the apprentice.
Oh, yes. And I'll tell you what, here's something that a lot of people don't realize is the more skills you build up. For example, let's say you are a plumber, but you also scuba dive and you are an underwater plumber, you can make more than a top lawyer. So think about how you can combine your skills of plumbing, carpenter, and then expand it into an area that is in high demand and in scarce, because that's where the dollars will come.
Wow, that's a great idea. That's a good connection there. Let's talk about the environment, because everyone seems to be, and the environment is a very hot issue, so to speak.
Yeah, so as I read about what your Prime Minister is doing with the new pipelines, there's also a lot of commentary on how environmental will be hand in hand with that. And along with that can be environmental jobs. So this, to me, is a whole new area that can be expanded by Canada and lessons really for all the other nations of how do we, develop energy sources but be environmentally safe. So I think people who have, experience with this or interest in this should pursue it. And also remember that companies, when they're embarking on new areas, they often train if people have the skills and capability and interest in it.
Now, I've heard you speak before, and you've talked about more or less career portfolios. Do you want to break that down a little further?
Sure. So a portfolio career is really someone who is working independently, and then they pursue projects or freelance projects or contract work or seasonal hires, and they put together for themselves a portfolio career, which is a series of different jobs. They are independent. They're not full-time at any specific company, but they might have a unique skill, such as a marketing skill, or they might be an HR person. If I look at the marketing person, for example, you might have one contract for PR. You also might be freelancing as an event planner, right? You also might be doing social media for someone. This way you build a career around a skill set, and you also take ownership in your own career development, and you also have other choices than people who are working full-time in a company.
Now, Tracy, before we run out of time, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about security, maybe even cybersecurity. That has to be considered a growth industry given our reliance on the internet.
Yes, and I would say sadly security is a safe industry, both on the physical level and also on cyber terrorism. Now, cyber terrorism, as you know, and cybersecurity is very new. And so we don't have a lot of talent in this area. And the projections for growth is like over 53% in the next 3 to 5 years. And it's everywhere. It's at the government level, it's at the state level, it's at the province level, it's at the corporate level, it's at the individual level. You know, every day I hear about someone getting hacked. We need ethical hackers, people who can defend our networks and our data. This is one of these new areas that if you have the aptitude, companies are actually willing to hire you. But again, you need to have the skills and aptitude. So if you're participating in hackathons or developing software, you might be a key person for these types of jobs.
Now, before I let you go, what would your best piece of advice be to someone who is not necessarily just a recent grad looking for a position, but someone who really wants to say, 2017, it's my year, I'm changing jobs?
Well, set your sight on a goal for yourself, and where do you envision yourself next January? This January, sit down and say, where do I want to be next January? Take a look at your job in your industry. If you're working now, let your employer know that you're interested in developing your skills and technology. I always tell people, keep your resume current, keep your profiles on LinkedIn, because if that's where recruiters look for other people. But stay on top of your game. Don't rely on the company to manage your career. You're living longer. You're living to 115. You're probably going to be working 70 or 80 years. At some point, you may need to think about your encore career and next steps.